Welcome back to another episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers, where we dive deep into the full spectrum of conflict, national security, and how all of this impacts you, me, and everyone else who calls this planet home. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton. Today, we're going to tackle a topic that doesn't always scream national security. But trust me, it's as important as tanks, jets, or cybersecurity. I'm talking about food. Yep, food security. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably sitting there with a coffee in one hand, maybe scrolling through your phone with the other, wondering what on earth does food have to do with national security? Let me tell you, everything. If you can't feed your population, your military, or even just the dude next door, the whole house of cards collapses faster than you can say supply chain disruption. But we'll get into that in a minute. Today's episode is all about how food is not just something that fills your belly. It's a cornerstone of U.S. national security. And as we peel back the layers, you'll start to see how vulnerable we might be if we don't get this right. But hey, this isn't a doom and gloom episode. This is Full Spectrum Frontiers, and you know we keep things optimistic and solutions focused here. Sure, we've got problems to address, but we're also going to look at what we can do to shore up our defenses and make sure America stays strong, one meal at a time. Before we dig into the meat and potatoes, pun absolutely intended, don't forget to like, share, and review the podcast wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more people like you who are curious about the intersection of security, politics, and the future. And who knows, maybe this episode will inspire you to start a victory garden of your own. All right, so let's start with some history, because when it comes to understanding the future, looking back is always a good idea. The connection between food and conflict is nothing new. In fact, you could argue that food has been one of the most powerful weapons in the history of warfare. You don't need tanks if you can starve out your enemy. Think about ancient siege warfare. When an invading army couldn't take a city by force, they would surround it and cut off the food supply. A starving population becomes a desperate one, and desperate people don't fight well. Pretty brutal, right? Now fast forward to more modern times. You've got World War II, where food played a huge role in national security on both sides of the conflict. The United States implemented rationing, and people planted victory gardens, not just to feel patriotic, but because it was essential to ensuring there was enough food for soldiers overseas. By 1944, it's estimated that these gardens were producing about 40% of all vegetables grown in the U.S. Let that sink in. Nearly half of the nation's vegetables were coming from backyard gardens. That's the power of a well-fed population working together for the greater good. But it wasn't just the Allies using food strategically. Nazi Germany used starvation as a tool of war, particularly in the Soviet Union. The siege of Leningrad is one of the most tragic examples. The city was surrounded for nearly 900 days, and over 1 million people died, mostly from hunger. Starvation weakened the Soviet population, but it also sparked a kind of desperate resilience that helped the Soviets turn the tide in the Eastern Front. So, what does this tell us? Throughout history, nations that could secure their food supply had a significant advantage. whether it was for their armies or their civilian populations. And nations that couldn't, well, they didn't fare so well. Food isn't just about survival, it's about strength, unity, and resilience. And that, my friends, is why food security is a national security issue. All right, now let's bring it into the 21st century, because while we're not exactly worried about medieval sieges or rationing for a world war anymore, the threats to our food supply today are real, and they're growing. We're talking about natural disasters, climate change, cyber attacks, and the good old-fashioned geopolitical tensions that could disrupt the whole system. Let's start with natural disasters: hurricanes, wildfires, droughts. These events can wipe out entire crops, devastate livestock, and throw supply chains into chaos. Look at California, which is a major food producer for the US. Between droughts and wildfires, the agricultural sector in that state has taken a massive hit in recent years. When California's food production suffers, it impacts grocery store shelves all over the country. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. Next up, climate change. Whether you believe it's human-made, natural, or somewhere in between, the fact is that weather patterns are changing, and that's causing big problems for farmers. Extended periods of drought in some regions, flooding in others, unpredictable growing seasons. All of this creates uncertainty in food production. And uncertainty in food production leads to higher prices, food shortages, and ultimately, vulnerabilities that can be exploited. But here's where it gets even more interesting. We've all heard about cyber attacks targeting big corporations or government agencies. But did you know that agriculture is a growing target for hackers too? In 2021, a ransomware attack hit JBS, one of the largest meat processors in the world, forcing them to temporarily shut down plants in the US and Australia. That shutdown created panic about a possible meat shortage, and prices spiked almost immediately. It's a wake-up call that agriculture is part of the critical infrastructure of this country, and it's not immune to the threats of the digital age. Let's not forget international trade conflicts. We live in a global economy where food isn't just produced locally, it's imported and exported across borders. A trade war with China, for example, could significantly disrupt the flow of key food products. Soybeans, for instance. China is one of the largest buyers of US soybeans. If that relationship goes sour, it doesn't just hurt American farmers, it sends ripples through the entire food system. And when food prices rise or availability decreases, you get unrest. We're talking about the potential for economic instability, protests, and worse. Remember the Arab Spring in 2010? One of the major triggers was a spike in food prices. So when we talk about modern threats to the food supply, we're not just talking about people paying more at the grocery store. We're talking about how fragile systems can unravel in ways that impact national security at home and abroad. But here comes the optimistic part. We're not helpless here. The US has some of the most innovative farmers, scientists, and engineers in the world, and they're coming up with solutions to mitigate these risks. From drought-resistant crops to vertical farming that's immune to outdoor weather conditions, there are a lot of smart people working on ways to future-proof our food supply. We just need to make sure we're paying attention, investing in the right areas, and staying ahead of these threats. Now that we've covered the broader threats to the food supply, let's talk about how all of this impacts the U.S. military. Because, believe me, food security and military readiness go hand in hand. A strong military isn't just about having the latest gear, weapons, or technology. If your troops aren't well fed, you're not going to get very far, no matter how advanced your equipment is. Think about this for a second. The U.S. military has over 1.3 million active duty personnel. Add in another 800,000 Reserve and National Guard members. That's a lot of mouths to feed, but it's not just about giving soldiers enough calories. It's about providing the right nutrition to keep them healthy, alert, and ready for action. That means well-balanced meals that provide the energy and nutrients needed for physical endurance, cognitive function, and overall morale. And it's not just MREs, those infamous meals ready to eat, though they certainly play their part. Now, imagine what would happen if there were a disruption in the food supply. Let's say a cyber attack takes down a major food distributor, or a natural disaster wipes out a critical supply route. All of a sudden, getting food to military bases, especially those deployed overseas, becomes a logistical nightmare. And when you've got troops stationed in remote areas or active war zones, a food shortage isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous. Troops need to stay fueled to perform at their best, and if food supplies start to run low, morale drops, health issues arise, and operational effectiveness takes a serious hit. This has actually happened before, by the way. During the Iraq War in the early 2000s, convoys transporting food to U.S. military bases were prime targets for insurgent attacks. A lot of lives were lost protecting those supply lines. And at times, bases had to ration food because getting enough of it through was a struggle. That's how critical food security is in conflict zones. It can literally mean life or death, and it's not something that can be taken for granted. But here's the thing. Even in peacetime, the military's food supply chain is vulnerable to disruptions, whether it's a natural disaster that devastates agriculture or a global pandemic that interrupts production and transport. The U.S. military needs a stable, resilient food system to ensure that its troops are always ready to deploy at a moment's notice. And it's not just about feeding the troops on the ground. Military families are part of the equation too. Think about all the bases across the U.S. and around the world that support not just soldiers, but their spouses, kids, and other dependents. A food shortage or price hike can hit those families hard, and when military families struggle, it affects the morale of the entire force. You see, food security isn't just about calories and nutrition. It's about ensuring the strength and stability of the people who serve and protect this country. Now, I promised this episode wouldn't just be doom and gloom, and it's not. The military knows how critical food security is, and they've been working on solutions. There's a growing focus on creating more sustainable and local food systems on military bases. Some bases have started their own farms or greenhouses, reducing their reliance on outside food sources. It's about resilience, and the military is pretty good at figuring that out. But there's more we can do. Supporting sustainable agriculture and securing our food supply at home is just as important as any new defense system or weapon. Because if the food stops flowing, the whole system breaks down, and no amount of technology is going to fix that. Let's talk about domestic agriculture. When you think of national security, it's easy to picture soldiers, tanks, and satellites. But what about the American farmer? Whether you realize it or not, farmers are on the front lines of national security too. That's right. Right next to your local grocery store and those cornfields you pass on your road trips lies a critical component of what keeps the U.S. safe and resilient. Here's the deal. The United States is one of the largest food producers in the world, and that's no accident. It's the result of decades of innovation, government support, and hardworking farmers. But domestic agriculture is under threat. And if we don't shore it up, we could face real problems down the road. Let's look at the big picture. The U.S. agricultural sector produces enough food to feed its entire population, and then some. We're a net food exporter, which means we send a lot of what we grow and raise overseas. That's great for our economy and helps maintain a stable global food supply. But it also means we rely heavily on what we grow right here at home. So, if our domestic agriculture system falters, whether due to extreme weather, economic pressure, or other factors, we're in trouble. If we can't produce enough food within our own borders, we become dependent on imports. And as we've seen, international trade can be a shaky foundation when tensions rise. Supporting our farmers is more than just buying local or shopping small. It's about investing in sustainable practices that ensure we can continue to produce food for generations to come. And by sustainable, I don't just mean slapping a green label on something and calling it a day. I'm talking about making sure our soil stays healthy, our water supply is protected, and our farmers have the tools they need to adapt to changing conditions. Because here's the thing. Farming isn't getting easier, it's getting harder. Climate change is creating unpredictable weather patterns, with floods in one area and droughts in another. Farmers are facing higher input costs, everything from fertilizer to fuel, and they're getting squeezed on all sides by market volatility. Not to mention, many family farms are struggling to stay afloat as big agribusiness continues to dominate. If these small and mid-sized farms disappear, we lose more than just a way of life. We lose resilience in our food system. And let's not forget about technology. Agriculture isn't just about tractors and plows anymore. We've got drones mapping fields, sensors in the soil, and data-driven farming practices. This high-tech agriculture is great because it makes food production more efficient. But it also opens up new vulnerabilities. If you've got farms reliant on software and networks, those systems become targets for cyber attacks, just like any other part of critical infrastructure. We need to be investing in both physical and digital protections for our agricultural system. But here's where the optimism comes in. American farmers are some of the most innovative, hardworking people out there. They've weathered storms, both literal and figurative, time and time again. And there's a growing movement towards sustainable and regenerative farming practices that can help us produce food in a way that's better for the environment and more resilient against future challenges. These practices, like crop rotation, no-till farming, and integrated pest management, not only help protect the land, but they also make farms less vulnerable to the kinds of threats we've been talking about: climate change, natural disasters, and even economic shifts. And look, this isn't just about rural America. Urban farming is on the rise too. From rooftop gardens to vertical farms, cities are finding new ways to grow food locally, reducing their reliance on long-distance supply chains. These innovations not only help create more secure food systems, but also foster stronger communities and local economies. At the end of the day, domestic agriculture is about sovereignty. It's about making sure that we, as a nation, can take care of ourselves. It's about independence and resilience. And it's about ensuring that future generations can live in a country that's not just secure militarily, but secure in its ability to feed its people. Because when we protect our farms, we protect our future. Now, we've covered the role of domestic agriculture, but here's where things get even more complex. Global food systems. Like it or not, we live in an interconnected world. You don't have to look much further than your own kitchen to see the evidence. That avocado you're slicing probably came from Mexico. The coffee in your cup, most likely from South America or Africa. The US may be a food-producing powerhouse, but we're still deeply tied to global supply chains, and that brings both opportunities and risks. Let's start with the upside. Global food trade allows for variety, economic growth, and mutual benefit. The US exports grains, meat, and dairy products to countries all over the world while importing things like fruits, spices, and coffee. This interconnected system keeps prices relatively stable and ensures a diverse range of foods year-round. It's also a tool for diplomacy. When nations trade food, it can foster cooperation, build alliances, and stabilize regions that might otherwise be vulnerable to conflict. But here's the flip side. What happens when those global supply chains break down? We saw it firsthand during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ports were backed up, shipments delayed, and suddenly items we take for granted were in short supply. It didn't take long for people to realize just how fragile our food supply chain really is. One of the biggest risks to our food supply comes from geopolitical tensions. Take trade wars, for example. The US and China have had an on-again, off-again trade relationship that's caused real headaches for American farmers. When tariffs are slapped on agricultural exports like soybeans or pork, it creates a domino effect. Farmers lose money, prices go up, and the food supply chain gets disrupted. In 2018, when China retaliated against US tariffs by imposing its own on American soybeans, farmers in the Midwest took a big hit. And it wasn't just about the bottom line. It raised serious concerns about food supply stability and how reliant we are on global markets. Then there's the issue of food being used as a weapon. We already talked about how food was used in warfare throughout history, but this tactic hasn't gone away. Nations can and do use food supply as leverage in political conflicts. Take Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for example. Ukraine is one of the world's largest exporters of wheat, and the war significantly disrupted global wheat supplies, causing prices to skyrocket and pushing millions of people in developing nations closer to food insecurity. When food becomes scarce, it's not just an economic issue, it's a humanitarian one. And when humanitarian crises occur, instability often follows. Now, think about the strategic value of food when it comes to national defense. If an adversary wanted to weaken the US without firing a single shot, targeting our food supply, whether through cyber attacks, trade embargoes, or even disrupting key shipping lanes, would be a highly effective way to do it, and it's not science fiction. As we've seen with attacks on critical infrastructure like oil pipelines and power grids. It's entirely possible for hostile actors to disrupt the food system through cyber warfare. But, as always, there are solutions. One of the key strategies to protect the U.S. food system is diversification. This means not putting all our eggs, or crops, in one basket. The more we diversify where we source food, the more resilient we become. That means strengthening our domestic food systems, but also maintaining strong trade relationships with a variety of countries. It's about not being overly reliant on any one source for critical food items. And let's talk about technology. The rise of vertical farming, lab-grown meat, and other agricultural innovations could change the game. These technologies offer the potential to produce food in controlled environments, reducing the impact of weather, pests, and even geopolitical conflicts. Imagine being able to grow fresh produce in urban centers or generate protein in a lab that tastes like the real deal. These advancements could make our food system more resilient, reduce dependence on imports, and help insulate us from global disruptions. But we also need to address supply chain vulnerabilities. That means investing in better infrastructure, both physical and digital, to ensure that food can move efficiently and securely from farm to table, whether it's coming from Kansas or Kenya. It means developing stronger cybersecurity measures to protect agricultural systems and ensuring that our ports and transportation networks are equipped to handle future challenges. At the end of the day, the global food system is like a giant, delicate web. If one thread snaps, the whole thing can unravel quickly. That's why maintaining strong alliances, diversifying our food sources, and investing in innovative agriculture are all essential to keeping the U.S. food secure. Because when the global food system shakes, it's not just supermarket shelves that get emptied. It's national security that's put at risk. And there you have it, folks. Food security isn't just about what's on your plate. It's about keeping the nation strong, resilient, and ready for whatever comes next. Whether it's safeguarding our farmers, protecting our food supply from modern threats, or thinking globally about how we fit into the world's food systems, it's clear that food and national security are more connected than most people realize. But here's the good news. As long as we keep investing in sustainable practices, innovative technology, and smart policies, we can continue to build a food system that not only feeds us today, but protects us tomorrow. I hope today's episode gave you some food for thought. Pun fully intended. If you found this episode interesting, share it with a friend, drop a review, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Every time you share or review the podcast, you're helping us reach more people who care about the future of our country, our food systems, and how we can stay ahead of the curve in an increasingly unpredictable world. Thanks for tuning in to Full Spectrum Frontiers, where we explore the full spectrum of conflict, national security, and everything in between. I'm Bennett Tanton, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Stay safe, stay informed, and as always, stay resilient.
It's just you, me, and the odds. We stuck together, we two peas in a pod. You dealt a bad hand, I'm there seizing the cards. We'll never be separated till we see in the gods. We've been low together, high forever. Long as we go together, we'll die whenever. Be a light, couldn't let the darkness try you ever. Truth in my word, you I lie to never. And when the world gets a little too hard, wipe your eyes, put away your sorrow. When it's war, I'll be leading the charge, and I'll be still fighting for you tomorrow. later, you with my eyes closed. There's nothing between us. Go to Mars or Venus, stand in front of every one of them rocks they slinging and being shit.